improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Welcome, everyone, to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition for the Christmas week. I am your host, Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and I have a few things that I was tracking today that I wanted to share with everyone. Before I do, a massive thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers, especially our latest and greatest, who have found the show so interesting that they want to give a little love and in return get a little back. So Matt B., thank you so much for signing up. Look forward to having you along for the ride. And don't forget, if you do want to sign up for Patreon, not only will you be afforded some pretty cool swag, but you will also have access to episodes only for our Patreon subscribers. So check it out. Well, it's been a busy week, but then again, it is always a busy week. I want to reintroduce some topics that we've already talked about before, and then hit on one that has been on the top of my mind for a while now. Why are you putting so much emphasis on the H? Let's go back and visit GovAI.mil. So I had the opportunity to let that marinate for a little while, and then I reached out to some folks that I knew in a couple of the branches of service. I spoke to somebody in the Marine Corps, in the Air Force, and in the Army. Navy did not get to because the gentleman that I know was on vacation. So if the Navy is using GovAI.mil, love to hear how it's working out for you. So what I found out was mixed. I spoke to one person that absolutely hates it, and here's why. Essentially, there are a lot of other artificial intelligence applications already online and have been for a while, the last 18 months. So artificial intelligence is not exactly new these days. The iterative improvements are new, but holistically, they've been out for a little while. So this individual had been using artificial intelligence applications at an IL8 level, which allows for a lot higher classification of information to be put into it. So there was some head scratching as to why suddenly are you taking 5 or 6 frontier AI models, squishing them together, and then reducing the level of classification that I can use these for when I'm already using tools that are niche and they work very, very well. I don't have a good answer for that other than I believe that the Department of War wants everybody in the Department of Defense, civilian and military alike, to be using these tools and really to become familiar with the framework, the interface, and the outputs. That's my 2 cents on it. But I absolutely am sensitive to the fact that if you're using a tool and it works very, very well, and your leadership comes down with a tool that is inferior and does not work as well, there's going to be some frustrations. One of the other concerns that was expressed is the IL level. So IL level 5, and for those of you that aren't paying attention, in layman's terms, it describes the level of information and its accordion classification that can be put into the system. Is it smart to allow a repository of information coming from the military to be in one place, susceptible to foreign influence, susceptible to backdoor exploitation, and as we all know, people abuse classification. There's not that many people in the U.S. government that currently hold top secret SCI clearance. There's many more that have a secret clearance, and this information is at the unclassified or classified not for foreign release. It is going, I think, to be abused pretty egregiously if the men and women that currently hold a top secret SCI clearance are making mistakes with classifications daily, right? Then I think that the opportunity for even further abuse of this exists. But that's not my hill to die on. I'm merely regurgitating what I have heard from one source. Now, moving into another, lower on the food chain, but also much more in sync with modern generation. That 18 to 25-year-old demographic that is most of the time the prime consumer of a lot of this emerging technology, AI no exception. That individual loves it and has found a lot of daily use for it that is in keeping with, I think, the guidance. part of the reason that the other individual didn't like it is that it limited usage to about these 15 different lanes. And if the information, the product, if the procedure that you were not trying to create was not within those lanes, it was a little unsuccessful. Oh, and by the way, they did complain about hallucinations. They asked very poignant questions that they knew the answer to on policy, and what was regurgitated was completely wrong. So I get it. Now, back to the individual from the Army that I spoke with that was having good results with this. I'm not going to codify their MOS because I really want to keep my information sources anonymous when it comes to things of this nature. Not that it's not to be discussed, but I don't want to slander any branch. I don't want to slander any one person. I don't want to bring anyone into the discussion that didn't ask to be brought in. So all that to be said, the tasks and procedures, the prompts, the AI interface, the things that this individual was asking GovAI.mil to do were fairly rudimentary, and to that end, successful. They found that the tool was helpful in the day-to-day functions, or at least could be over time. Remember, this is only very new, couple of weeks at the most. Now, the other person that I spoke to in the Marine Corps, didn't use it. And it's interesting because the position that they hold, I thought would have lended itself beautifully towards using it. But honestly, the answer that I got was, there's not a deficit. I've created something that has existed for a while. And as willing as I am to use artificial intelligence to improve the process, I just don't see where any improvements are going to be levied. And it is new. So maybe 6 months, 8 months down the road, there'll be a little more data. But from what I've gathered so far, it's a mixed result. I am a little concerned about putting all of our information in one location that could be exploited, but I'm not the only one in the room that's had this reservation, and I can only trust that top men are working on it right now. Top men. Let's see if there's anything else of relevance on that subject. I don't think so. Yeah. So let's move on to a different subject. Venezuela is looking like a test bed for what is and is not legitimately possible from the U.S. government, what our public perception is willing to tolerate, what our foreign allies are willing to permit, and then what an odd reaction from Venezuela. I can't exactly forecast what the conclusion of this is going to be, but I feel pretty strongly that there will be a ground incursion at some point, probably within the next 60 to 90 days. I think gently as a proof of concept under whatever auspices the administration will come up with, or possibly the Department of Defense, but national command authority does rest with the president and the administration. So even if the military decides to make an incursion into sovereign territory, it would have to be the commander-in-chief who's ultimately greenlighting that. So all that to say, it is truly what the administration decides they want to do with Venezuela. If conducting a ground operation in that country is in the long-term vision, then it's going to be done. And I am still, other than some of the topics that we've talked about in some of my earlier podcasts, I'm still a little confused as to what the end state here is. Are we looking for regime change that is replacing Maduro with a pro-U.S. president, much more likely to give us mineral rights, oil contracts, and other benefits, or not? I can't imagine that we would ever have any kind of a base there. Other than the minerals, which is the obvious, to include gold, possibly the oil reserves, but it's not something that we would willingly go to blows over. So I'm not 100% sure, but the temperature in that part of the world continues to heat up, especially in light of the national security strategy and the pivot towards the Western Hemisphere. Again, my personal prognostication, between 60 and 90 days from now, I think we are going to have some type of ground incursion into Venezuelans' sovereign territory. And hey, we will see what comes next. So, switching gears again, this particular subject is one that is out there. I am not the only person that has talked about this in a public setting before, but It's something that I haven't digested on the show, so I thought I would talk about it a little bit, and that is foreign influence in the U.S. military. For those of you that are not aware, the U.S. military rewards citizenship for service. So upon completion of a minimum enlistment with one of the major branches of the military, I say major like there's a minor. There's not, but the Coast Guard is, kind of lumped under there. I think they have the same program, but I will admit ignorance, and I'm not 100% sure if it applies to the Coast Guard or not. But Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, upon completion of a minimum term of service and presenting a DD-214 with an honorable discharge, you can be granted citizenship. And the process is fairly simple. And it was instituted quite a while back as a recruitment tool, but also something that has been done by a lot of other countries as well. French Foreign Legion notwithstanding. It, in many ways, is a benefit to the military. There's not a negative on face value from having people who willingly want to volunteer for military service and get rewarded for citizenship. There's a lot to be said for the diversity and complexity of the talent pool that is out there, but there are risks, and some of those risks are being seen. Not necessarily an uptick, but they're out there. So we have approximately 40,000 men and women that are foreign green card holders serving in uniform. If you spread that across active and reserve, National Guard, all of it, about 40,000. According to 2023 numbers, I don't have 24s in front of me, but it's probably pretty close. Let's not forget that the armed forces exceeded its recruitment goals for this year. I mean, blew them out of the water. Numbers we haven't seen since post 9/11. The individual who is coming from another country, a green card holder, in and of themselves is not necessarily a security risk. The security risk comes from the fact that you've got 40,000 foreign nationals, and at scale, that's a potential risk. There is foreign leverage over family abroad. There always has been. And if you look at the Russian and the Chinese influence in this country with people embedded in industry and academia and in the military, there are numerous examples of information being exploited by the service member for host nation gain. There has been examples of desertion, especially in our nuke field, which is fucking scary. You have a service member of another country who goes through a long and arduous pipeline to be a nuke technician, whether that's subsurface, surface, it doesn't matter. And then they abscond with all of that formalized training back to their home country. Now, some of you may be saying, I didn't see this in the news. I'm not familiar with this story. Well, some of my information is not exactly open source, and we'll leave it at that. It does happen. I think that's the real takeaway here. And it's something that is challenging because the oversight is not as robust as it could be or should be. They've also reduced the amount of time required for a non-U.S. citizen to be naturalized. It used to be the completed enlistment, proof of DD-214, and you were naturalized. You were a U.S. citizen. That has been reduced in many cases, in some cases as short as a year. And although not verified, I have heard that they are starting to do it at least with one branch of service upon completion of entry-level training. Not exactly sure about that, but I'll look into it more and circle back in a future podcast. There is strong evidence of China targeting and recruiting U.S. service members, not inherently via the naturalization process, but there is a huge attempt by PRC, People's Republic of China, to recruit service members. And in many cases, it's effective. Back in August 3rd of 2023, you had 2 U.S. Navy service members that were arrested for giving sensitive information to the PRC. You've had major reporting describing how China's efforts to target U.S. troops for exploitation and recruitment has taken place. It's active, it's ongoing, and the risk is because it's at scale. With 40,000 foreign nationals serving in uniform, vetting is challenging. It should be done multiple layers by the service component, but also NHS, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, in conjunction with some of our national intelligence apparatus. So there is strong evidence, and some of it is anecdotal and some of it is hard fact, that there is influences by our major competitors, Russia and China. Look, China steals us blind on a lot of things, and we kind of roll over and give it to them. We offer a ton of visas for Chinese citizens to come over to America to find employment in companies because our domestic talent pool in many cases is lacking. It is. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they have a couple billion people in China, or at least more than a billion, and we don't have quite yet 500 million. So statistically speaking, you're going to have a deeper labor pool in China than you are here. The problem is that they come embed themselves into business, into the military industrial complex, and then where does that information go? There's been numerous reports of companies that support defense infrastructure being bought out wholesale by China, and then all of that intellectual property, that IP, goes to them. Anyways, we're digressing. All of that to say that there are checks and balances that could be implemented into the naturalization process for foreign nationals who want to serve in the military. And I am not jingoistic. I am not xenophobic. If foreign citizens want to prove their patronage by serving in the U.S. military, and as a reward, apply for and upon approval, receive citizenship, I'm not opposed to it. But I don't necessarily think that 40,000 across the board wholesale is exactly the right stance to take from a security standpoint. That's my take on it anyways, but we'll see. So next up on my interest list for today is drones. As I am sure that you have picked up from previous podcasts, I'm a huge fan of technology. I'm a fan of emergent technology over the horizon. There's a lot of amazing things that the technology that has come out of conflict has been given to or trickled down to the private sector. A lot of the medicine that we know today, battlefield trauma, has been directly matriculated from our lessons over the last 20 years of armed conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. Tremendous strides have been made in improving tactical combat casualty care in that golden hour. A lot of the men and women that are riding in ambulances have benefited from that. And a lot of people have learned great improvements in prosthetics, TBIs, and a whole host of battlefield-specific injuries that can have benefits in the private sector. So that's just one example in the medical field. Technology in other areas has improved tremendously. GPS was a wholesale DARPA invention. There was no civilian push, no government in the United States that said, a government department that said, we need a way to accurately position people on the globe. No, it came out of something that the Vietnam War put forth and then went live in the 70s. And well, we're all familiar with it now because it shrunk down to something that fits in the size of our phone. Okay. So I'm a huge fan of technology, and I think that conflict forces that technological advancement. Need, the mother of invention. Drones, it's simple. We've had them since World War II. Unmanned aircraft are not a 21st century invention. They were flying drones, stick and rudder technology back in World War II to help train our fighter pilots in combat tactics. It was perfectly acceptable to take an older aircraft, retrofit it with a couple of rudimentary autopilot features, and then unleash it in the sky for pilots to go and shoot down. There's a very interesting story, actually. If you want to go back in history, there was an aircraft that was a drone that they could not communicate with. It basically lost comms with the host controller and then was going to do a nosedive off in the city of California, so the state of California. So that's an interesting story and probably best for another time. But drone technology, it's not new. It's been around for a while. What is new is the tactical way that it is being employed. Previously, at least for the last 20 plus years, in the United States, drones have been used for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And they were bespoke, one-off, very expensive, designed to loiter for extended periods of time and provide real-time information back to the operator. And it was a fantastic tool because it bridged the gap between some of our satellite reconnaissance technologies and the man on the ground or woman on the ground, person on the ground. Okay. I'm hip. So it was the CIA that actually first weaponized the drone. Up until that point, 2001, 2002, 2003, drones were big, stupid expensive, and designed for taking high-resolution photographs or live video feed. The CIA came up with this great idea of putting a couple of missiles on it. The shit worked. And now, of course, we have, fast forward, an entire infrastructure of drone technology designed for find, fix, and finish. It's great. So you can have somebody in the United States piloting a drone in the other half of the world, keeping tabs on a target for sometimes days, and then prosecuting those targets. I mean, during the Biden administration, there was almost 20 lethal strikes a day for a period there. That's a lot. And then Ukraine happened. And holy shit, this entire tactical method of using drones was born almost out of whole cloth. Now, it wasn't entirely unheard of to have small company level, platoon level drones be used in warfare. There's a program of record for the Marine Corps called the Switchblade. The Army uses it as well. It's really cool. It's a drone, fits inside of a tube. The wing is in line with the fuselage. It pops out of this tube. The wing springs out and it flies unguided to its target, kind of like a miniaturized ballistic missile, has a small warhead in it, and off it goes. But they were not fielded in mass. And the revolution that has taken place in Ukraine is incredible in its scope. And that right there is where our gap exists. It is a horrible gap in the sense that we pay it lip service. The way that the United States procures things, and I know because I worked in an acquisitions command the last 2 years of military service, so I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to this topic. The fact of the matter is that it can take 7 to 12 years to field a new program of record. So when the military identifies a shortfall, it says, we need a thing. It sends that requirement up to the folks that's job is to find equipment and field it down to the warfighter. And that process is slow. From the request to the fielding can take up to 12 years, and it's very expensive. Oftentimes, people that are working on this project will rotate out and hand it over to somebody else. So it is a marathon, not a sprint. When it comes to tactical drones, things like Group 1 and 2, first-person attritable drones, that model, complete garbage. The problem is that the U.S. military procurement structure does not work that way. When it comes to hardware, program of record is the language that everybody speaks. Hardware has to be created and vetted and tested. If there's a commercial off-the-shelf or alternative that industry has, great. We don't work that way in the military, and we don't treat hardware like software, which is what it's definitely going to take if we're going to close the gap. Okay, let's look at this from the 30,000-foot view. It's not necessarily one specific gap. It's more like 4 overlapping gaps in our drone technology. And that's not really technology because that's unfair. We are actually technologically far advanced when it comes to drones. We don't have the procurement ironed out. So what are the gaps? All right, this will help. So the first one is the modern battlefield is treating drones like ammunition. And we don't. The U.S. military has never treated drones as disposable. Each one is gold-plated and exquisite. And I don't mean literally gold-plated. I mean, it's a term that's used to describe something that is constantly added to a requirement. Oh, I want it to do this. Oh, and it has to be able to do this. And I want it to get me coffee. And I want it to email me sexy things in the middle of the night. And each one of those delays the fielding of the object, whatever it is. Okay. So we don't treat drones like ammunition, and we need to. So that's one gap. The industrial capacity to surge this technology, well, it doesn't exist. So we've talked about in previous episodes, rare earth minerals and all of the things that it takes to create these, from the microchips to the motors to the RF control boards. Well, a huge bulk of that is made out of the country. And a lot of it is with China. That's a problem when it comes to scaling up for 2 reasons. One, because you want domestic supply lines. In the event of a conflict with China, well, they're going to cut those supply lines off instantly. Secondly, you don't know what kind of backdoors they're going to put into any of the software. So you have to be very cautious about sourcing it to them. But the other thing is the domestic manufacturing capacity for these drone parts, at least I'm talking again about categories 1 and 2, the first person, those DJI Mavericks that you've seen. A lot of the commercial drones that you and I can purchase, we don't have the industrial base for that. Those motors, those cameras, those batteries, those flight controllers, those are all made almost exclusively out of the United States. And a huge chunk of that commercial drone sales is an imported product. That's a gap, a huge one. What else? Training. Training is a problem. We don't train our troops to treat drone employment and mitigation the way that our adversaries are learning to do, specifically Russia at this point, since they are deep in the fray of a drone conflict with Ukraine. But even Russia's not doing it as well as Ukraine. I'll pause here just for a quick moment and tell you something. The only reason Ukraine has even lasted this long is 2 things. One, it's drones. They already had the industrial capacity baked into that country prior to Russia on their doorstep. There was a lot of hardware and software that was already coming from factories in Ukraine. They had 0 preconceived notions about fielding. If you go back to the United States during World War II, our military industrial complex was turned up to 11. Everybody went to the factories and worked. Where do you think we got Rosie the Riveter? Everyone supported the war effort, from bonds to manufacturing. They forego precious things to give it to the warfighter or help the warfighting effort. Well, that's the footing that Ukraine is on. So their rules are off. I mean, everything's out the window. And they are building, no idea is too wacky. I mean, they have drones that drop napalm. They have drones that are kamikaze. They have drones that, of course, do surveillance. And they have drones that are using kinetic weapons attached to them. All of these things, this laboratory, is what has helped Ukraine stay in the fight. And the other thing, quite frankly, is it's on home turf. That changes a lot from a tactical and strategic point for that. They have home field advantage. They know the terrain. It's their cities. And then psychologically, it's their cities. We would fight for every blade of grass if somebody invaded the United States. Ukraine is doing the same thing. And they are doing it with this technology, this drone technology, this tactical level. Not drones that fly 1,500 miles away and loiter over a target. Not a drone that fires a hellfire. I'm talking about fire and forget, first-person piloted, squad-level drone technology. And that, quite honestly, is the only reason they have lasted this long. It's the only reason. So you need better training and you need better realism for those U.S. forces that have the drones in their hands. And in addition to that, you need counter-drone technology pushed down to that same level. So this is the one place that the Marine Corps is kicking ass. And it is not unheard of for the Marine Corps to be on the forefront of things. Small, can turn on a dime. And honestly, the Marine Corps has a lot less preconceived notions culturally than some of the sister services do. Now, fuck that, all of them. The Marine Corps is America's premier warfighting force. There's very little fat baked in. They're fast, agile, and when it comes to things like this, the Marine Corps, honestly, it takes the lead in many cases. And they have said that drone and counter drone technology needs to be pushed down to the smallest unit possible. I'm talking squad level infantry. And I don't mean that they have a drone, because we had drones in 2003. We had drones in 2001. In 2003 Iraq, we had these hand-launched or rubber band-launched drones that were used for over-the-hill horizon reconnaissance. That's great. Now weaponize them and give me, 500 for each platoon. You can't scale up that fast. We don't have the components. But setting this aside for a second, because we've talked about the material gap, the Marine Corps publicly framing this as a small UAS detection and offensive capability for the warfighter in 2025, that's huge. That's the Marine Corps identifying a no-kidding material gap and a training gap and verbalizing ways to fix it. So the Army is currently trying to ramp up. They have created a couple of drone units, but still, you're talking about buying a couple of million drones in the next 2 to 3 years. How the fuck are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? No, seriously. There's a couple of ways that you can kind of get there, but today, in December of 2025, we don't have the infrastructure. The pipeline's not there. You're talking about the Army had a budget of $80 million for 24 and 25 for drones. They just requested almost $800 million for 2026 for drones. So the demand signal is there. Great. That's not the problem. You have to get rid of the red tape when it comes to procurement. You have to treat drones and drone technology, at least in this category that we're talking about, like you did during World War II. The old model of cost and performance and schedule, you got to throw it out the window. It doesn't work. You have to treat hardware like software. And we don't do that. Not at all. So you're going to have to eliminate a huge amount of red tape when it comes to the federal acquisitions guidelines. You're going to have to blue list or allow for purchase a suite of hardware that we don't currently blue list. You're going to have to allow for foreign purchasing of some of these components. There is some that should never be sourced outside of the United States, or at least in a U.S. controlled manufacturing facility. But the bulk of these items that I can order from Amazon to put together a drone, Jesus, you have to allow those to be procured outside the borders of the United States. If you're talking about building cheap Ukrainian-style drones, that's the battlefield lessons that have been learned in Ukraine, and they have to be applied. So you could stockpile as a option. For example, in order to bulletproof your supply lines, so, don't buy 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 items. Buy 500,000. If your concern is that foreign manufacturing is going to be cut off in the event of hostilities, then you future-proof it by stockpiling a lot of this stuff. I mean, shit, we're doing it with rare earth minerals already. So do it with some of these components, and then you can final assembly in the United States if you're worried about that. The problem, though, in my experience, which is a dangerous way to start any conversation, is that, again, I go back to our procurement model. We do very, very well at fielding very well thought out and tested, for the most part, products, items for the warfighter. The military industrial complex, whether it's ships, planes, tanks, or weapons, does a really good job of taking 7 to 12 years to really think about how we're going to create something and push it down to the military. You can't fucking do that. You can't do that. You're talking about Ukraine-style drone war. It's different. It's short kill chains. It's massive consumption. It's rapid iteration. And U.S. acquisition muscle memory is mismatched when it comes to this. It's not going to work. So that whole thing has to be revamped, I think, first and foremost. You can start slowly to create domestic manufacturing of components for a lot of these drones, but it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, this is going to take 2 years at the fastest to retool a factory to make this if it exists, or to build a factory from whole cloth if it does not. So eliminating some of the restrictions on these components in the short term, stockpiling them. Meanwhile, in parallel, you're building infrastructure for these components. You have to take off the restrictions that currently exist for procurement, and you have to create new procedures. You also probably are going to have to put one of the 4 branches of service as the proponent, basically the one that makes the final decisions. And that's hard because all 4 services have different needs. The Navy is struggling right now with underwater autonomous systems, underwater vehicles. They have a couple that they're in the concept phase, the TRL level, technology readiness level, hovering, between 5 and 8, but that's not going to cut it. What are you going to do to defend against a naval ship that is attacked by a swarm of drones? You don't have a robust counter-drone system that would handle a swarm attack. As an example, you compare that to the U.S. Air Force, whose drone requirements are vastly different. They don't have an offensive drone capability at the tactical level because they don't need one. The Air Force has control, and they do it really, really well, of, the Reaper, the Predator, all of the other drones that are flying way up there with lethal and non-lethal capabilities. No, what they're looking at is an autonomous wingman to give a force multiplier towards the fighter pilots. So maybe you have 1 manned aircraft with 2 autonomous systems on the wing, and those systems are already in the works and have been for a while. So their drone capabilities are going to be different, and their needs are going to be different. It's the Army and the Marine Corps that are going to need these first-person drones, these attritable drones, most desperately. So I would argue, put one of those 2 branches of service as the proponent. I'd probably say the Marine Corps, because I think they're the ones that can adapt and transform the fastest. They're the fleetest of foot. So the other thing that you're going to need to do is create an entire training pipeline that you can't do right now. I'll tell you that in order to fly drones, even on a military reservation, you had to telegraph your intentions weeks in advance so that airspace could be deconflicted between the planes and the helicopters that are already flying in that very congested airspace. And then it was limited. It was limited towards a specific grid square. Well, you can't train that way. When it comes to drone warfare, you need to eliminate the restrictions to airspace. You need to eliminate the restrictions to bandwidth as well. Remember, you have to be able to talk to these drones using whatever radio frequency spectrum they operate on. A lot of those are pretty high up in the spectrum band, which are occupied by other things. Well, you got to fix that. And then you have to accept losses. And I mean losses. If the lance corporal, the corporal, the sergeant, the private, if they're all scared shitless about losing a $350, $400 drone, this isn't going to work. You have to treat this like ammunition. Yeah, take care of it, but you have to have a robust training pipeline that allows for losses. And on the other side of the coin, you have to integrate that hand in glove with the counter drone piece of it. So what I envision is big force-on-force exercises that are using as a force multiplier tactical drones. Over the hill, over the horizon, tactical drones to locate and destroy the enemy. If you don't create those training pipelines, this isn't going to work no matter how much equipment that you have. You have to legitimately accept the limitations of the drone, and you have to build a system that is hardened against GPS denial and spoofing, electronic warfare, passive detection, low-cost interceptors. I mean, drone mitigation TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures are out there for U.S. military installations that are in the Middle East or in an area where they either have received drone attacks or are susceptible, but the drones that they are defending against are still $10,000, $12,000 Iranian-made drones. They're bigger. They're not very hard to shoot down with warning. Order a $75 drone off of Amazon and fly that into a military installation. Don't do it. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm using this as an example, okay? Somebody's going to do it and they're going to come back and like, oh, well, he told me to. Try shooting that down. There's not a lot of things that are able to shoot it down. Now, what is the lethality of something that's small in the first place? It's not, but you multiply that by 100 and you have an opposing force launching hundreds of those. You need a robust and layered counter UAS mitigation strategy, and the techniques and tools have to be pushed down to the squad level. So you're talking about an E5 and an E6 not calling for a specialized piece of equipment because they see a drone overhead, but no, immediately tasking a fire team leader to break out a platoon or squad organic defense, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic, and destroy that drone and everything that comes behind it. And it has to work, and it has to work reliably. And that counter UAS is lagging. It's lagging because the problem is everywhere. It's a defensive deficit. And it's one, again, that the military is not stupid. They've identified it, but nothing is being done rapidly enough. And here's my fear, okay? My fear is that in 2 years, we are going to go up against the closest peer adversary we've had since hostilities ended in World War II. And I'm talking about China. We are going to go to war with China within the next 2 to 3 years, most notably over Taiwan. It's going to happen. It's not me coming out with some big reveal. This is all 4 branches of the military and the last 2 to 3 administrations. Everyone knows this. Everyone's forecasting towards 2027, maybe 2028. So we don't have the time. We have to field these now because the training that it's going to take to become proficient in not just using the technology, but creating the techniques man, that takes time. That takes time. And training is one of the things that the military in America does better than almost anyone. So the thing that you want to ask when it comes to fixing these gaps is, how many drones per squad, platoon, and company do you have actually on hand? Not ordered, not demoed, not in the procurement phase, but on the shelf, ready to deploy. What is your monthly training consumption rate? How many are you burning through? Because that tells me that you have enough to replace the ones that you're crashing and losing, but it also tells me that you're out there training the force. We don't think twice about going to the range and shooting 7,000 to 10,000 rounds of ammunition for a platoon. Yeah. Don't even think twice. No problem. You need to have that same attitude towards drones. What is the electronic warfare survivability rate? Like, no kidding, hard metrics. What is the opposing force able to attrit, and what are they not? What is the time to order to the time to delivery? So time to contract, time to field. That lets you know if the military industrial complex is robust enough and the pipelines are flowing to actually get drones into the hands of the warfighter on a needed basis. Where are you getting your components from? Do we have domestic sovereignty? Domestic content? And if you're not, how many of those are on hand from foreign sources to at least build the final product? And then what is your organic counter UAS coverage? What fraction of the formations that you currently field on the battlefield can detect, ID, and then defeat without specialized third-party units on the battlefield? Those are the things that are going to tell you as a listener if we're making progress. So over the next 18 months, if the military is able to answer those questions with metrics, then I think we're in good shape. It's not, as I've said, a technology shortfall. The U.S. has amazing drone technology. We have the scientists, we have the engineers, we have the manufacturing facilities to put these things out, but we do it on the bespoke level. We do it on the gold-plated level, and that's not going to work when it comes to first-person drones. Okay, so that's everything that's worth mentioning when it comes to this. I think it's fascinating to see that we are anticipating future needs. I would be even more fascinated to see if we were actually rectifying that, because simply making a public statement saying we're going to order 1 million drones in the next 1 to 2 years is okay, cool, dude. I've got shit in my basket in Amazon that I know darn well I'm never going to order. I'm not walking around saying that I've got a new Segway. Know what I mean? So, a lot of interesting things on the horizon. I am very interested to see what happens to Venezuela come January, February, a little bit into March. I'm also interested to see what Russia and Ukraine come to as far as any kind of ceasefire or peace agreement. Ukraine, I hope you keep fighting. I know that's not a popular sentiment in a portion of America, but this call sign, keep the fight up. I'll be more than happy to send you some ammo if you need it in the form of new drones. Do you like the shirt?
It's awesome. That's so good.
It's a throwback.
Throwback. Keep it real.
I hope I get some serious hate mail from that one. God, I would love it.
Did you see that? I know what I was going to say. Speaking of Ukraine, that he's recognized. He is officially recognizing the territory that Russia has.
Yep.
Yeah, that he's recognized it as Russian territory.
I can't fucking believe it. And Europe just gave a loan to them. I'm sure you saw this. Mm-hmm. A $90 billion loan so that they can
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So Europe, I love the fact that they are at least being like, well, fuck you, America. We're going to step up and we're going to give that much needed lifeline of support to Ukraine if you're not. But man, I can't believe Trump would do that. It is the biggest stab in the fucking back because this sycophant wants to be able to go on record saying, well, I'm this big, peacemaker. Give me the Nobel Peace Prize. Look what I did in Gaza. Look what I did in Ukraine. Look what I did at the Kennedy Center. I deserve this.
What I did. Look at what I did in Somalia. Look what I did the list is ridiculous.
I'm so fucking pissed about this issue because did nobody forget what happened to Sudetenland? Remember that? World War II? Hitler says, well, you give me Sudetenland and I won't invade Poland. And then they did. And then what happened? Oh, they invaded Poland.
Yeah, like you could trust anything that he said, let alone trust anything that Putin said.
Exactly my point. I mean, past becomes prologue. There are people that are still alive. There are not many left, but there's a few people still left alive that remember that event. Like, it's not like it's an ancient history. For fuck's sake, I don't disagree with a lot of the things that he does, but the delivery, Jesus Christ, man, the delivery sucks. And when it comes to this issue, I am so diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty disconcerting.
I think it's extremely disconcerting. You are basically encouraging Ukraine to capitulate. And how do you think it feels to the individual Ukrainian? Like, forget your ideology, but you're a sovereign country. And you had another country, the biggest on the block, just tell you, just fucking take it.
Yeah, I mean, you're capitulating, with a hand on the throat, because of the hand on the throat. I mean, it's like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy considering how much has been already invested in this and considering who the fight is against.
Correct.
I mean, it's a win-win situation for the U.S. to be involved with.
You're giving everything that Russia has asked for, you're giving it to them. Guarantees of not joining NATO, territory, recognition that the war was somehow just. The worst thing that the Russian economy could do right now is stop the war in Ukraine. They have their entire economy shifted towards a war footing, and if it stops, their economic impact is going to be even worse because at the same time, we're lifting the restrictions.
Yeah, and frankly, the longer you keep them in the fight as the U.S., the better for the U.S. in a lot of ways.
So many ways. They just canceled. They were planning on a Russian space station in 2030. They have now scaled that back, and they're going to recycle components from the International Space Station, even though the other countries are going to crash it into the ocean. Russia's going to take their capsule, and it's going to become the nucleus for the new space station, which is like, dude, the dumbest fucking thing you can do, but it shows they don't have the money.
Exactly. It's like burn their resources and just keep burning them. And
that's how we won the Cold War. We didn't go kinetic. We outspent them and we broke the back of the Russian economy. If you keep this pressure up, it will work, but you got to be patient. This motherfucker doesn't want to be patient.
Yeah, it is mind-blowing. And it goes back to what we've talked about before, where it's just about headlines and empty promises and just
the instant gratification.
Yeah, allowing I don't know, but the best way to put it is, but just instant gratification is like the flooding the zone of the media. And it's like you go back to the Epstein files as a great example. It's a great example of all of the promises that we're going to give, and we're going to use that as leverage as for voters, and we're going to use that as leverage to garner support, and then everything changes once they get what they want. So that's, I think, the thing that's most disappointing about all of it. is how blatant they are about it. Is it's cartoonish.
In some ways, it is. And it's going to come back to bite us all in the ass, because what do you think the next administration is going to do? With a vengeance. With a fucking vengeance. And so begins the tit for tat. So stupid.
Which
dumb.
is so ridiculously unproductive and reactionary and just not effective.
So that's it for the Christmas week of the Carry On podcast. Don't forget, if you enjoy our content, you can reward that enjoyment by adding us to your subscription button. And I want to wish all of you a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, holiday season all around. Enjoy the time with friends, enjoy the time with family. The world is always melting down, but take comfort in the fact that is at the very least not on our doorstep. So until next time, I am the Iceman, and don't forget to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.